Okay, today's guest needs no introduction. I'm talking with David Icke. I think every single person here knows who David Icke is. And he has a new book out right now, Everything You Need to Know But Have Not Been Told or Were Not Told, right? And so today's conversation is going to be a little bit on the challenging side for a lot of people because there are those among you who have actually had direct experience with some of the topics we're talking about. And we're first going to set it up by saying hello to David, whom I have not been on screen with in a few years, and I'm so happy to be with again. Hi, David.
Hello, Regina. Been a long time.
It's been a long time. I'm loving the fact that your work is now going so much more mainstream, really. I mean, we think of you as the grandfather of conspiracy, but now we're learning that conspiracy is not a word that we should have been playing with all along, right?
Right, yeah. Well, more like the uncle. The grandfather bit's to come.
Okay.
Although I am 66 very shortly, but it's just a number. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the interesting things that's happened, and it's happening quicker and quicker, that which was dismissed as conspiracy theory, and let's not forget that term conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist was brought into widespread use in the 1960s by the CIA, and the documents exist to prove this. And they contacted major media organizations, urging them to use these terms to discredit those that were understandably questioning the official story of the Kennedy assassination and the assassination of Malcolm X, etc. So it's been a term of derision. And it's interesting that people don't ask the question, well, it's a conspiracy theory. Yeah, hold on, deep breath. But is it true? Do the facts stack up? They never go to that stage. But what's happening now is reality. Life is stacking it up for them. I mean, we've got a very topical situation at the moment. I've been writing for years that these major internet giants like Google owned YouTube, Facebook, etc., were the creations of the American intelligence community and of organizations like DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon, an organization so sinister it makes Monsanto look like a Sunday school afternoon. And now, because of the revelations of current times, we're seeing the scale of data mining and surveillance that is being compiled by Facebook, and B, how lackadaisical it is with protecting it. Now, if organizations in the private sector, if you like, can access this Facebook information in terms of billions of people, billions of profiles, and be able to use it for political manipulative reasons, are we really so naive as to believe that the CIA, the National Security Agency, the Pentagon, and so on, is not using the same stuff? And so these things, they tend to, I find, get people to go, well, hold on a minute. Maybe there's something in this. Maybe when Facebook is doing face recognition in its system, maybe it's not to give you a better experience. Maybe, actually, it's to get even deeper into your life on behalf of some very sinister people. Yeah. And, you know, the point being, with these internet giants, and we're talking about Google, of course, who can manipulate through algorithms the search engine results to emphasize some information and suppress others. We've got YouTube now that is blatantly canceling and deleting channels that have gone on for years with lots of followers of people who are in various ways challenging the official narrative. And so what you have, and this is not in any way an exaggeration, you have in Silicon Valley, on behalf of these other sinister organizations in the background, the greatest concentration of surveillance and censorship power in known human history. That's what we're looking at. And it's something that is getting more and more people, just this area, to think, hold on a minute, what is going on? Well, what's going on? That's just a smear of what's going on, but it does give you an insight into it.
It does. And David, there's something else that has to do with the another Google relationship that is incredibly invasive, and talk about gathering useful data. And that is, a lot of people don't know that the original two Google founders, I think it was Sergey and Larry, both married at roughly the same time, the two women that started 23andMe, which of course they funded, which of course 23andMe is gathering with our permission. We pay them to gather our genetic data, which can be used in any way they want. We're talking about a massive ability here to use it in a corrupt fashion. And we're going to be talking about DNA in a little bit, so maybe you can just kind of jump in on this one. Well,
I mentioned that connection in the new book, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told. And there's another connection. The sister of the person at that DNA database organization runs YouTube, which is deleting all these channels.
Yes.
On behalf of those that don't want any alternative to the official narrative. And one of the things that I show in the book very clearly is that when you break it down to the nub and the core of who is calling the shots, who is calling the shots in the public arena, the shadows that really call the shots, you're looking at an incredibly small number of people. You could easily get them on two hands of fingers, who are running Google, who are running YouTube, who are running Facebook, who are running the DNA database company. And then you add the CEO of Apple, who is also connected to these people. It's an incredibly small number of people that are dictating the information that people receive or don't receive, and are compiling this surveillance data in great detail over 7.5 billion people, potentially, but certainly in Facebook's case, 2.2 billion that they claim as active members. So, you know, the ratio of the few to the many is incredible. And going back to what you said earlier about, you know, how the conspiracy theory is now, you know, in our face as fact, I've been saying now for nearly 30 years, a very, very few people control global events and the direction of the world. And people were saying for so long through that 30 years, that's crazy, that's impossible. Well, actually, excuse me, it isn't. Look what's happening. And technology is allowing this number to get even smaller, because he or she that controls the algorithms controls the output and the outcome. You also have to look at this whole artificial intelligence agenda, which is basically in many ways, indeed more than many ways, the end game of all this, controlling the human mind via artificial intelligence, so that eventually, and not too far in the future, according to their timescale, artificial intelligence becomes the human mind. And look at some of the companies that are at the forefront of that AI agenda. Google,
right.
Facebook. I mean, look at it. It's obvious. And what has happened is that these companies have been allowed, encouraged, massively funded. I mean, just as a quick aside, when you watch how these various Silicon Valley, what I call the devil's playground companies emerge, whether it's Uber, whether it's Airbnb or Google or Facebook, they actually emerge with enormous funding at a time when there is no prospect of a profit and a return on that funding. It's like money is no object. And what that money does is allow the development, the expansion, the monopoly situation. And once you get the near monopoly, which Facebook and Google has, then it's no more, you know, hey man, Mr. T-shirt, Zuckerberg, hey man, I'm one of you, cool. What you then do is you start changing the rules, because you can now dictate, because you have this monopolistic or near monopolistic situation where you can decide what people see and what people don't see. And people have, of course, been pulled in and fallen for it. And the events of this week have been an absolute wake-up call for anyone with half a brain cell on active duty about the scale of what is happening out of Silicon Valley.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, you know, another, what I'd like to do with you is go into the intelligence that's behind all this, okay? Because, you know, you were the laughing stock of England, and when you started out, as we've mentioned many times in the past, you would speak to, I think your first talk, you spoke to what, 3 people? You had 3 people in a room, and now
I've done major events in people's front rooms, Regina.
Exactly. And now you arrive in certain countries in the world, and the mainstream media comes out to greet you because what you have had to say over time has borne out to be true. And it was really based on your understanding that there is a corruption, there's a corrupt type of intelligence at the core that is able to infiltrate into and essentially use and control the people that we consider those at the top, the influencers, the elite. And so we're speaking of archons, and I thought we would go ahead and dive into this part of the story. Now we have so much to cover about the nature of what archons are, because it's a name that's loosely talked about and tossed about as well. And most people have no idea. And then we'll progress that into, what does an archon have to do with what you have spoken of as reptilians, for example. And I want to start this story for a reason at where you do in the book, at the original kind of flaw in the program, and discuss that for a moment, because there was an intelligence that was perpetuated in a flawed state.
Well, I as I've researched over the years, over the decades, have looked for patterns and looked for common themes, because my perspective has been that if something is happening now, it's been happening a long time, because world events have not suddenly emerged in terms of this manipulation. This has been a very clear and a very long journey, well, in our perspective of time anyway, of the constant and incessant centralization of power, for instance, into fewer and fewer hands. So you start with a tribal situation where small tribes are deciding how they live their lives. The tribes were then brought together, lots of them, into what we call nations. Now a few people are dominating all the former tribes from the center of the nation. And then you have, as we have in Europe particularly, you have the nations brought together. So now a few people are dictating to all the nations. And that process has now reached the point that we've just discussed, where a handful of people in Silicon Valley have such incredible dominance over the population, the global population as a whole. You also look at the fact that through this period of what we call time, this timeline, people have come in and they've gone out. They've been born and they've died. They've been born and they've died, playing a part in pushing the world in this direction when there was no prospect that the outcome would happen in their lifetimes.
Right.
So you've got people coming in and out, people coming in and out. Here today, gone tomorrow, people. Now, it occurred to me a long time ago, there has to be a common force, a common thread that links all this, that is always there. And as I traveled around the world and I talked to shamans and other people from ancient cultures. I've read their accounts. I've read the accounts of others of different cultures and their beliefs and what they talk about in terms of the history of the world and their culture. I've talked to endless people who are connected to the intelligence community and are what you might call insiders and whistleblowers today. And there is an extraordinary correlation between all of that. These ancient cultures, of course, call this common thread, shall we say, different names. Some, like the Gnostic people, call them archons. The Zulus call them Chitahuri. The Islamic belief system calls them jinn. Mm-hmm. So it goes on. But what you're looking at is the description of a non-human force, which ultimately is not in form, though it does take. That is an inverted distortion expression of consciousness. And if you're looking for a word in the human language that would describe it, though it hardly does, but it's the closest we can get, this consciousness is psychopathic. Another way of describing it is demonic from a more religious perspective. And this consciousness has sought to infiltrate human society, pull human consciousness into itself, so human consciousness becomes an outward expression of it. And this has moved on, and we've seen more and more evidence through the ages of this empathy-deleted, psychopathic, demonic consciousness, which is manifested in endless world events, local and global, which have been expressions of that. I mean, a simple thing. Bombing the innocent from the sky in Libya while claiming to be protecting them from violence. That is an expression of this psychopathic consciousness in control of that situation, allowing unbelievable numbers of people through the decades and centuries to die of hunger in a world of plenty. To have the empires that were driven by this, these incarnations of this consciousness, known as the British Empire. Now we have the American Empire, though they don't give it that name, and all these other empires, imposing their will upon other ancient and societies and cultures, and all that they've done. Pedophilia, Satanism, the sacrifice of children. This is all coming out of this psychopathic, I'll call it archontic consciousness as one name for it, which has no capacity for empathy. And one of the things that has people reel back and say this can't be happening, like sacrificing children, torturing children, sexually abusing children, and all the death and destruction that you see from the military, particularly the US and British military. People say they would never do that. No one could do that. And I say to them, no, you could not do that. But this consciousness, which expresses itself through these various military and political and corporate and all the rest of it, groups, they don't have empathy. And if you don't have empathy and there are no emotional consequences for your actions because you don't feel any consequences emotionally no matter what you do, the whole fail-safe mechanism of human behavior is gone. It's deleted. It's not there. So we cannot, in my experience of researching this for 30 years, we cannot really overplay or exaggerate the scale of what people call evil that this consciousness is capable of. And here's the key. Up to this point, this consciousness, which of course plays out in a particular band of frequency, which reflects its state of being, a very low band of frequency, it has been seeking to pull humanity in general into that frequency with their perceptual, emotional, and mental states. Because once you pull human consciousness into that frequency can merge with human consciousness and take it over. It's an ancient theme of possession. So the idea has been to structure human society and manifest events that pull humanity into states of fear, states of anxiety, states of depression, states of hatred, states of unprocessed anger, because anger in its form of wanting to make a difference can be processed into something positive. And the more that you can pull people into these low vibrational emotional states, you're pulling them into the vibrational stadium of this archontic, psychopathic, demonic awareness or consciousness. And that's what's happened. Now, the end game that I mentioned about AI is to connect technologically the human brain, the human mind, the human thought and emotional processes to artificial intelligence. So instead of manipulating human perception, as has happened up to now, the artificial intelligence becomes human perception and does its thinking and emotional responses from that AI perspective, deleting what we now call human consciousness. And I hear, as I say in the book, I hear people all the time, of course, AI this, AI that, AI the other. I don't hear this question. What is AI? What is it? See, there's two types of AI. There's one that I call algorithmic AI, encoding AI. And there's the other one, which some people within the business call strong AI. I will call it learning AI, a state of awareness AI, which I say is an expression of this psychopathic, archontic distortion. And what they're doing is manipulating humanity to be technologically connected to that demonic, archontic AI, so that that becomes every human thought, every human perception, every human emotion. That's where we are going so fast. And of course, the more they can pull people into cul-de-sacs of irrelevant focuses of the mind, with political correctness, or you can't say this and you can't say that, or well, what about Trump? Oh, I like Trump. Oh, I hate Trump. I'm going to stop Trump. I'm supporting Trump. And all of this is going on. A few people in Silicon Valley are dictating human society. People are looking over there because they've got caught in the perceptual trap of the here today, gone tomorrow vaudeville stage show we call politics.
So true. And there's, going back in your own work, the one book you had many years ago called Love is All There Is, Everything Else is Illusion. We need to get into the nature of what these beings are not, because we live in this area of a realm between realms of very, very high frequency, and then these lower realms reaching into it, the archontic realm reaching into this. And we're the game in between. And one of the things I've been doing recently is I've been out on the speaking circuit talking about this, or the origin story from a slightly separate point of view, which I think I shared with you years ago, having to do with us being a kind of hybrid species of this animal complex of Earth and this other dimensional being that's highly creative, highly intelligent, has compassion, understands beauty and love. So when you're talking about this archontic realm in your book, you're saying the one thing these beings cannot generate, they can't generate creativity. They don't have any. They can't generate love. They don't have any. Let's talk about why they're trying to do these very things to the human species, because people will say, why are they doing it? Why humans? We're a unique and beautiful species at our core, and they need what we have. We don't need what they have.
Well, what I do in the book, I look at the writings of this people. It's not a race, it's a belief system known as Gnostics. They were way ahead of their time in many ways. They were the people that ran the Great or Royal Library of Alexandria, which was way ahead of its time, and was destroyed by the Roman Church, of course, because it was way ahead of its time. And they describe in these writings, because whenever this Gnostic belief system got a platform anywhere to communicate its ideas and its beliefs, like the Royal Library of Alexandria, like the Cathars in southern France, which were Gnostics, then the Roman Catholic Church sent the boys in, the equivalent of sending in the American military or the British military today, and destroyed them. And it seemed that at the siege of Montigny Castle in southern France in 44, that was the end of the Gnostics, and we didn't really know what they believed. But then in 1945, a jar was found, an earthen jar was found at a place called Nagamadi, about 75, 80 miles north of Luxor on the Nile in Egypt. And what was inside was an absolute treasure trove of Gnostic writings, which is, it's estimated were probably put in that jar and hidden away around 400 AD, which kind of syncs with the destruction of the Royal Library at Alexandria in Egypt. And what they describe is a force which ultimately is something that doesn't take form. It's consciousness, as I would call it, has been manipulating human society and human perception, and has created a fake reality. They said that this fake reality was the reality that we experience as the world, and that the real reality was beyond it. And what I do in the chapter afterwards, when I explain all this and quote from the texts, is compare what they were saying with the fact, as I've been saying now for, again, decades, and now more and more mainstream scientists are coming out and saying the same, including a guy called Rich Turrell at NASA, that we live in the equivalent of a vastly advanced virtual reality video game. Interestingly, the physics of our reality and the physics of video games are basically the same. And when you compare the modern computer view of being in a simulation and what the Gnostics were describing in their own language of the time, you are, I suggest, looking at the same thing. And they said, basically, that this archontic force had created this artificial reality, this simulated reality, to entrap the human mind in a prison, and had basically made the human body a prison. And going back to what you said earlier about, we are something greater than we appear to be. The human body, the human mind, the human brain, a better way of describing it, is a processor of information. It ain't bothered what the information is. It will just process it. what you let in as information, it will process. So if you go way out there and you get massive insights, well, through the heart too, but through the mind, through the brain, you will process that information and it will manifest here as thought and insight and understanding. But I call the human body, and I have done for decades again, a biological computer. It's a processor of information. It's a receiver transmitter of information. Now, if I want to control what goes on this computer screen in front of me, I have to encode the decoding processes of the computer to decode some information, which is what I want on the screen, but not decode other information that I don't want on the screen. This is the same principle as the Chinese internet, where so much of the internet is denied the Chinese because it's firewalled off. What this consciousness manifesting through particular bloodlines and non-human form as well, like reptilians, greys, whatever, out there beyond human sight most of the time, have done, is systematically program and encode the human brain to only process certain frequencies of information. And thus, if that's all you do, and that encoding is basically the five senses. The information the five senses process is basically what most people consciously live their lives with in terms of a perception of self and reality. The idea is to hold people in that five sense reality. So the greater self, the expanded self, not some alien in a spaceship, an expansion of our own consciousness, does not impact upon the perceptions of the conscious mind. And when you do that, you are isolating the possibility of perception to what the brain will decode. And we hear phrases that absolutely sum it up. We hear people say, look, mate, I can't get my head around that. No, you can't process that information. That's why so many people still, though it's getting smaller, still think I'm a lunatic and crazy and insane because they literally can't process the information I'm talking about. But the brain will process information that you allow into its processing and decoding processes. And therefore, if you reject the program, which is a perceptual program, which runs from cradle to grave, which I call the postage stamp consensus in the book, where you come out of the womb and your parents who've been through the process you're about to go through are impacting what they've downloaded as the program, the postage stamp consensus of possibility and reality. They're now immediately passing it on to you as the youngest child just out of the womb. You then go to what we call school and university and college, and your whole formative years are sitting at a desk or whatever, a lecture room, having this postage stamp consensus given to you as reality. They're telling you what is right, what is wrong, what is possible, what's impossible, what's sane, what's insane, all of it. And you go through your entire formative years downloading this program. You then go out into the institutions as a journalist, as a doctor, as a scientist, as a politician, as somebody in the corporate world, and you take with you, all of you, this download of postage stamp normal, which is a narrow band of perception of the possible. You're now in the perceptual prison. You're basically operating in five sense reality and the five sense frequency band. These institutions then confirm to each other that their postage stamp normal is how things are. Journalists don't write articles about reality and come to people like me. They don't write articles about health and go to a complementary alternative practitioner who may have had amazing success with this particular subject they're talking about. They will go to a scientist who will give them the song sheet version of reality, which is a nonsense, provably so. And they will go to a doctor who will give them the song sheet version of that particular health subject. And then all the time, as you're going through this sausage machine, this programming machine from birth, from womb to cemetery, basically, you're having 24/7 now, the mainstream media are bombarding you with confirmation of this postage stamp consensus of possibility, because that's the point of that the mainstream media comes from, and I have to say the vast majority of the alternative media, yes, in terms of possibility and the world. Then you have peer pressure. All the people around you who've been through this programming operation and bought it, then jump on you if you have the audacity to question it. You look at politics. Oh, politics, we've got choice. Yeah. Do you want someone slightly on the left of the postage stamp, or slightly on the right of the postage stamp, or someone in the middle of the postage stamp? That's politics. Science is on the postage stamp. Medicine's on the postage stamp. The media's on the postage stamp. And when you step off it and say, up yours, darling, I'm out of here, you realize the extraordinary amount of information that lies in wait for you once you are in a position where you reject the intimidation to conform to the postage stamp. And then you go, whoa, so that's what's happening. And so the whole idea is to focus perception within a frequency band, and this postage stamp consensus is that focus of perception. I can't, it's not possible. The world is solid. I'm just, I'm just born 70 years and 10, and then I disappear into nothingness. I mean, all this stuff. Or some God is dictating, and you must do what this man in a frock says because he knows what God wants you to do, and all that stuff. It's all part of the postage stamp programming. And what is happening now, what people call awakening, is that people are stepping off the postage stamp. And they're saying, okay, this is what I've been told is reality. Let's see if it stands up. And you're only a few steps off the postage stamp before you say, what a load of crap that we've been believing up to this point. It's a hoax. It's all a hoax. Politics is a hoax. Science is a hoax. Medicine is a hoax. Journalism is a hoax. It's all a hoax. And this is the awakening. People are awakening not to something new, but awakening to who they've always been. But this hoax has shielded them from remembering and from understanding. And that's what the awakening is.